Winner is Amanda Ames. Amanda began her career in public service in 2002 with the Louisiana Department of Health as an engineer intern in the Safe Drinking Water program. Since that time, she has held several positions in the program and is now chief engineer for the Bureau of Engineering. She is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Louisiana in environmental engineering. Please welcome Ms. Amanda Ames.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, good deal. It's always nice being home. I'm originally from Lafayette, so it was great to come home and eat some good food and and talk to you guys about drinking water today. So a little overview of my presentation. We're going to talk about the Safe Drinking Water program within the health department and kind of go over like what we do. A little information about Louisiana water systems in general, sustainability of those systems and resiliency, and also solutions. So this year is actually the 50th anniversary of the Safe Drinking Water Act. Originally, it was to establish what we call maximum contaminant levels for specific contaminants that had considerable health impacts. It also established the need for public notification. So in the event that a water system has a violation, they are required to notify the public of that violation and also what health implications that might have. And so the chart that I have on this slide is a really, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? And since in the last 50 years within the Safe Drinking Water Act, we have had a lot of new regulations. And of course, that costs money. Costs money to the water systems, and ultimately it costs money for consumers as well if new treatments are needed, et cetera. And that trend is not really going to stop. EPA just released several new regulations in the last couple of years, and I'll talk a little bit about that too. So within the last, or a little bit over 10 years, let's say 10 to 20 years, we've had a revised total coliform rule, and that's microbial contaminants. We've had a disinfection byproducts rule, another stage 2 of that. And we've had a groundwater rule, which is for those systems that use groundwater, like water wells. It puts some additional requirements on those systems. And currently, this year, we have the PFAS rule. And so what PFAS is, they call it a forever chemical. And basically, PFAS chemicals are pretty much everywhere in the environment. I probably have it on my clothes or on my makeup or something like that. They really are everywhere, but there's been a lot of studies done that show that there's PFAS chemicals in drinking water, primarily in other states. We are doing the testing right now to see if any of our water systems are really impacted by that, but that is a big federal rule that's coming down to all the states right now. Lead and copper rule revisions and improvements. I don't know if any of you are involved in having to do your lead service line inventory. I see some heads. That was due last week. Huge lift for people to do that requires every water system to notate what the material is for every service line in their distribution. So that has been going on for the last 3 years. The due date was last year. And then, of course, now that the inventories are done, there's additional requirements that will be coming with that going forward. Also, there's going to be another consumer confidence rule. So if you are familiar with the consumer confidence rule, every year you send a notice to your customers about, this is the testing that was done, these might be the violations that we had, these were the results of our testing, et cetera. And that the state actually does that on behalf of water systems, and the water systems just have to publish it to the public. But now that's going to be required twice a year instead of once a year. So that is another regulation coming down. The state will still be handling that for the systems, however. And then in the future, these are a few things that are the buzz across the country that we know EPA is looking at. One would be a stage 3 disinfection byproducts rule. Cybersecurity, that's huge. Any water systems that use SCADA, there might be some vulnerabilities there for cybersecurity. So there's lots of discussions on that front. There's not a rule per se in place yet, but I do think that there might be some regulations that come down just in general regarding cybersecurity. Perchlorate and an arsenic MCL reduction. So every once in a while, they determine that the level of a contaminant might not be the most protective for public health, and then they might reduce it. But what ends up happening is, if currently you might be fine, and then they reduce it, and then your water system might end up having a problem. So something that you did not have to treat before, you may find that you might have to treat for that if the level is so much lower and you actually have some of that in your water. So a little bit about the Safe Drinking Water Program and what we do. We provide the chemical and bacteriological monitoring, so the sample collection part of all of these rules, and also the analysis, so the laboratory. We have a state laboratory that we use for the coliform monitoring or the bacteriological monitoring, and then we also have a contract lab that we use for all the chemical tests. We do inspections for water systems every 3 years. That's a requirement through EPA for us to do that. Oftentimes, though, we try to do our inspections more than every 3 years, just to get out there and make sure that there's not any issues, and also provide technical assistance more often than the 3 years. We run compliance reports, et cetera. We also review plans. So if your water system is growing and you have new lines, or you need a new water well, or you have any kind of infrastructure change, our offices at the local level, or the regional level, I should say, do all of those plans reviews, and then also permitting. We respond to complaints. So, if any of you are familiar with like brown water complaints, we respond to those and try to help systems to figure out what to do with those types of complaints. And then last but not least, we do a lot of emergency response work. So if there's ever an impacted part of our state, let's say a hurricane, our staff do a tremendous amount of work helping water systems to get back online, helping them find generators, fuel, et cetera. All of those things during an emergency, our staff are heavily involved in. This is a map of all of our regional and district offices and the contacts associated. So if you ever need any information about drinking water, your water system, you have questions about funding, anything like that, you can use these contacts on this map and they will be able to guide you. My information is also on here. So a little bit about some information about our water systems in Louisiana. Just some background about groundwater versus surface water. Sometimes you'll hear those terms used. Groundwater is water that comes from a well. Surface water is going to be water that's treated from some type of river, reservoir, lake, etc. Groundwater, generally speaking, not all the time, but generally speaking, has a lot less treatment associated with it. Most of the time in Louisiana, we have high iron and manganese. So you might have to have some type of filter to remove that. Iron and manganese are not regulated contaminants, although they look bad. Nobody wants brown water. They don't really carry a negative health impact. Unless manganese is at such a high level, there is a health advisory. But again, it's not something that the health department, quote, regulates. But we do groundwater and or surface water. You have to disinfect the water. Surface water is going to go through a tremendous amount of treatment before it gets to the tap. So just think about Mississippi River all the way to your house. There's a ton of treatment that goes on with that, and there's multiple testing throughout each process to make sure that that water meets the regulations and it's potable. We have more groundwater systems in Louisiana, but we have more people on surface water. So because we have like New Orleans and Shreveport, et cetera, those are surface water systems. So in Louisiana, we have roughly 1,250 water systems. So those are going to be broken down into what we say community versus non-community. Community is going to be a municipality, a city, even a neighborhood. Non-community is going to be where people don't live, like a school, a restaurant, etc. So we have about 950 of the 1,250 are community water systems. And we usually have about 200 of those systems under formal enforcement. So it's about 15% or so. And formal enforcement basically means you have an administrative order by the state because you have deficiencies that haven't been fixed and you need to fix them. And so you're under an administrative order. Now the 200, it ebbs and flows because sometimes people get an administrative order and they get back into compliance very quickly. And sometimes you're on an administrative order for a few years because it takes funding to fix the problems in the system. And so that's understandable. So Mike talked a little bit about this statistic. It's the drinking water in Louisiana, but this is from 2017, was a D-. And it's estimated to be billions of dollars to bring all of the water systems up to current code. But I will say that with the latest rounds of funding that have been happening in the state over the last 3 to 5 years, I don't expect this to be worse. It's definitely going to be getting better. And I'll talk to you about some of the statistics on the funding, but so many people are able to get money right now to fix the problems. So our infrastructure for water is going to be getting much better in the state. Small systems have the most difficulty with compliance. It's resource-based. 92% of our systems have less than 3,300 people on them. So that's pretty much the majority of our water systems. And like Mike talked about in his presentation, operators, staffing, resources, money, there's a lot of things that play into the compliance problems that the small systems have. So from a drinking water perspective, we define sustainability in 3 ways: technical, managerial, and financial. So your technical is going to be like what I always say, like your pumps and your pipes, things like that, your actual infrastructure. And do you have enough? Do you have enough capacity? So are you growing so much that you might need to have an extra water well drilled because you need to have more pumping power? Those are things that you need to consider from a sustainability standpoint long term. What's going to keep you pumping water to your customers long term? That's from a technical. From a management, you're going to be looking at, do you have enough operators? How do I retain operators? Do I have policies and procedures in place that keep my water system sustainable long term? And of course, financial. Are your rates sufficient? Are you getting, are you complying with audits? Are you looking at funding? And then how are you going to pay funding back? And what's going to keep you, they're all related. You can't have one and not the other two. You really need all 3 of them working together to make sure your system is sustainable long term. And resiliency, I would say that this is a huge issue for us in Louisiana. This is the 2020 list of storms that impacted Louisiana. And I remember them vividly. I worked every one of them, especially Laura, which really impacted our southwest part of the state. And with Laura and even Delta, we saw a lot of water systems that I would say historically have been fine during an event have some major issues. So a lot of times we talk about small systems having problems, but now, in this day and age and looking at how many complications there are with infrastructure, we had some very large water systems have some pretty big problems during these storms. So it's not limited anymore to just small communities. It's everyone, and everyone has to have, a resiliency plan in place to make sure that you can continue operations during an emergency. I like to show a few pictures just to give you an idea of how drinking water was impacted during some of these storms. This is Laura and Cameron Parish. You can see that they lost their elevated tower, which is catastrophic. And the city of Lake Charles was without water for several days, a couple of weeks, I think. That was very difficult for them. And that's a large population with hospitals and major infrastructure, people infrastructure, dialysis clinics. You think about water at your house, but not all of the things that drinking water also impacts. People have to run businesses. People have to, we have to have medical facilities functioning. So drinking water is super important. And when it's not there at all, it is devastating. The picture on the right I feel like shows the magnitude of the destruction that happened there, because you can see like people standing there and how big that loss was. We had 250 water systems impacted by Laura. We had 103 of them had no water at all, which is, I think, a record for any storm that storm that we've ever had. And in a 4-day period, we went out and looked at 92 different parts of different systems. It was a very stressful time. We had, personnel within our group that were also impacted. So we had a devastating winter storm, which for Louisiana, it's strange, right? But you might remember when we had Uri a few years ago, and I would say North Louisiana and Shreveport were probably the most, come to memory as being the most heavily impacted. Again, you don't have water, and now your hospitals don't have water. Your dialysis clinics don't have water, and the roads were frozen. It was very difficult to get resources to people that needed it. So normally you can truck water, you can have a water buffalo or a tanker or something like that and moved to the hospital or the entity. But if your roads are frozen over and you can't get there, now what do you do? So that was a very interesting situation and something that we had never been through before. And this impacted 400 water systems. So you have all of these freezes, and then the pipes break, and then you don't have water, you don't have pressure. And then you end up, if you don't have water, you lose pressure. Once you get your water back, then you're on a boil advisory until samples can get taken. But boil advisories, again, not that big of a deal compared to having no water at all. So let's talk about solutions, because we talk about problems a lot, and we oftentimes don't focus on, well, how are we going to fix it and what are we going to do about it? So I think it's very important to always point out problems, but we also have to talk about how are we going to fix it and move forward. So there's a couple of things. We're going to talk about the grade rule, but we're also going to talk about all of the funding as well. In 2021, Act 98 was passed, and it provided for rulemaking to establish LDH to establish letter grades for water systems. But it also amended the receivership statute for systems that were a D or an F, and provides for a lot of transparency for consumers. So the idea was that a lot of consumers complain that I don't understand what the violation letter means, or am I in danger? Like, what is a disinfection byproduct? How much arsenic is a problem, et cetera. So, but everyone understands letter grades. It's very similar to school, and they're based on multiple factors. And so that started in first grades last year for 2022. what constitutes a grade. And so I want you to think about, like, in school, you have so many grades during the semester that make up your final grade, but not one grade in the semester is going to make or break your entire semester. So this is very similar. It's based on multiple factors. So first and foremost, the heaviest weight's going to be on your MCL violations. So if the water system has any MCL exceedances that are a public health problem, those count for the majority of the grade. Those are worth 30 points. Then we have some state violations, like not having a certified operator or something of that nature. Water system financial sustainability. Do you have a rate study? Are you complying with your annual audit? Is your system under a fiscal administrator? All of those things are looked at in this grade. Operation and maintenance performance history, infrastructure violations, customer satisfaction, and that's basically complaints. So we look at complaints that maybe the health department receives, but we also look at the complaint log that the water system keeps. But you can't have more than 10 points deducted. So if you have a system that, you get a lot of water complaints, it's not going to impact more than 10% of your grade. And then also your level of secondary contaminants. We talked about iron and manganese. That kind of goes back to the groundwater situation and whether or not that's a problem for your system. So here are the point values. It's a 10-point scale. So an A is 90 or greater, etc. And then you can look at how everything's broken out. The heaviest weight, again, is on the federal violations. And then the next to that would be an infrastructure violation, and that's up to 20 points. So what happens to a system if they have a D or an F? There's a couple of things that may happen. Well, first, notifications. So once the grades are published, which is every May the 1st, and it's for the previous calendar year, the notifications go to State Bond Commission. They go to the Legislative Auditor's Office. They go to the Attorney General's Office. This was all required by statute for LDH to notify all of the entities. Your water revenue can only be used on water infrastructure or water system related projects. You cannot utilize water revenue to pay for anything else. It has to be used on water only if you are a D or an F. You may not be able to incur new debt for improvement that is not for your water system. So in other words, if you have to go to the State Bond Commission and you have, let's say, an F water system, but you're trying to build a spray pad for the community, that's probably going to get flagged because you need to fix your water system prior to putting in that splash pad. Splash pad also would require water, right? So you need to fix that before you can have that. As far as receivership goes, your system may be put into receivership, which is where it's a court-ordered appointee that would come in and operate and maintain and oversee the water system until that water system is fixed. And so that could be a long period of time. The receiver would have to develop a plan that would get the system into compliance, and that may include consolidating. So consolidation would be, with your neighboring system, if they had the capacity to do that, and then you wouldn't have water revenue, after that. But you would have a consolidated water system and not have to deal with the water system anymore. So here are the breakouts of what the grades looked like for 2023. You can see the overwhelming majority of systems are within the A, B, or C range. And usually it's roughly 12 to 15% are a D or an F. And one of the good news is that at least 30% of those systems are getting funding right now to fix the situation. So that number is going to decrease greatly after the construction phase of all this funding goes through. So really and truly, we are doing well in our state. We are the only state that looks at water systems in this manner, but other states are actually looking at doing something similar. So let's talk about funding. Within LDH, we have a drinking water revolving loan fund, and it is a loan program, but there's also a lot of principal forgiveness associated with these loans. Principal forgiveness basically means free money. So in our loan program, just a regular loan, you can get a 2.45% loan between 20 and 30 years, and that's going to depend on what type of infrastructure the project entails, and it's 2.45%. If you have an administrative order, you can get up to $200,000 of principal forgiveness. If you had a consolidation initiative, we have been funding consolidation projects in the state at 100% principal forgiveness for the last few years, and been able to successfully consolidate about 6 or 7 different water systems in the state that were in dire straits. And so those projects ended up impacting over 50,000 people, giving them good, compliant drinking water through that money. So that's been an initiative that we've really been focusing on, because sometimes the sustainability part comes into play, and ultimately joining with your neighboring water systems and all of you coming together is the long-term solution. Yeah. Uh-huh. Partly, it's also, she asked the question, who moves that forward? It's, yeah, I mean, partly LDH, but also the two entities, and so the entity that's taking on the other one usually is the driving force, and puts a lot of the documentation together, et cetera. But yeah, we're heavily involved in those. There's 3 additional funds that we have right now in the revolving loan fund. So the first one is the general supplemental fund. We're getting about $28 million a year over 5 years. So we are in year 3 of that funding. So we're still getting $28 million in that fund for the next 3 years. And that is the breakdown is 51% loan at the 2.45% and 49% principal forgiveness. The principal forgiveness is going to cap out at $3 million, but that's still pretty good. If you need a $6 million loan, roughly half of that will be forgiven. Then we have an emerging contaminant fund. And so we talked a little bit about iron and manganese, right? Manganese is considered an emerging contaminant. So originally this fund was developed to remove PFAS, but in Louisiana, since we have a lot more manganese, more of our projects are going to be focused on manganese removal. So if you have a system with brown water, you might look into this fund because it's 100% principal forgiveness, to be able to get filters put in to be able to remove that. The last one is the lead service line replacement fund, and that will go hand in hand with the inventories that were just turned in. If you had an inventory with any lead lines noted on there, then you have about 10 years to remove those lead lines from all of the service connections that are impacted by that. This fund can be used to replace any lead service line. It can also be used for inventories. So if there's any systems that still haven't completed an inventory, or they want to continue to do, maybe they have a lot of unknowns and they want to continue that work and hire someone, they can use this fund to do that as well. So again, it's a 51% loan, 49% principal forgiveness, but the loan portion has a 0% interest rate. So water sector program is another amazing funding opportunity for water and sewer systems right now. In the last round 1 and 2, it was federal money, it was ARPA money, and we did 125 projects totaling $438 million were funded. So that's going to be impacting 103 water systems that were under an administrative order. This goes back to the 30% I was talking about that I know are going to get funding somehow. 55 consolidation projects in the state. And there will be there will be a round 3. Actually, the October 21st, if you missed it, I'm sure it's online. There's a DOA did a webinar on how to apply for round 3. But October 28th through December the 12th is when the portal opens for applications for round 3. This year, it's state funded. So the legislature will put money into this program, it looks like, in perpetuity, hopefully every year. But of course, that's going to be relative to whatever they appropriate every year. This year, $75 million was put in. The grant cap is still $5 million, but there's a $2.5 million for each system consolidated, and they will cap that at $10 million. And also, the weighting of the scoring changed slightly, and for-profit water sewer systems are not eligible. And also, if you received money in round 1 or 2, you have to sit this round out. So they kind of want to look at, new projects, et cetera. But I would encourage you to look at how to apply. The application period starts next week, and they will start funding projects in January, it looks like. So get your applications in for anything that you need. There was a bill passed in this last session that established the water sector emergency subfund, and there's a lot of times when people have emergencies, water systems have an emergency, but they don't have the money to fix it, and so oftentimes the government will get involved and try to help get some funding to get whatever needs to be fixed quickly. So this subfund was set up to provide for emergency grant funding or to address an emergency, right? But the priorities are systems that are taken into receivership. So you have to keep that in mind. If you have an emergency request, it will also be tied to looking at whether or not the system needs to be in receivership. So from a transparency standpoint, we did a lot of work recently on our drinking water watch. If you're not familiar with that, it's basically all of our drinking water information, data, everything about water systems is online. So you can look at it, you can look through whatever results you want to look through, lab reports, et cetera, violations for a water system. It wasn't very user-friendly for many years, and we've tried to bring that up to more, ability to read it and search and write reports, et cetera. So I encourage you to look at it. If you have any questions about your water system, you can find it on there. And then also, we will start having all of our records online. Like if you're familiar with DEQ's EDMS site, their permits and any kind of correspondence with systems is all online. Ours is going to be like that as well. So you will be able to search documents. You can look at historical documents that the agency might have for your water system. You will all be able to look through that pretty easily. So these are all of the resources. We try to have our websites to where you can remember them. The water grade website, we have water grades. We will keep historical water grades up there as well, but it's an interactive map. You can click on the map in the parish, pick the water system. There's a report card associated with it, like why someone's grade is what it is. Everything that you need to know about regulations, the Safe Drinking Water Act, how we collect samples, when we're collecting samples. All of that can be found here. Also, from an engineering perspective, if you're looking for design standards, that is also all available on our website. So thank you for having me today.
All right, thank you so much. Anyone have any questions before we take a break? Okay, we'll break until 10:30.